Welcome, everybody, to the fifth Saturday discussion on Liberty Uncensored. I'm Corey King, and today I'm going to talk about this week's topic, which has been the militia. What it is, its history, what happened to it, where we are today, what it means to be a militia. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read Monday's article, The American Militia, the Minuteman. Very short, get us into the right place. The militia is and or was the ordinary condition of a free people. From the 700s AD, at least, militias, by any other name, were fundamental to almost all the nations in Northern Europe. In the USA, from the earliest colonial settlements through the War for Independence and even up to the early 20th century, the defense of the community rested not in a distant professional army, but in the citizen body itself. Farmers, craftsmen, and tradesmen were expected to keep arms and to muster when called. Among them stood the Minuteman, men who were trained to respond at a moment's notice. This system reflected the old Republican principle inherited from English constitutional tradition, which inherited it from earlier nations, and reinforced by colonial experience that a standing army in peacetime was a danger to liberty, while an armed citizenry organized by the states was its safeguard. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this traditional structure was rapidly replaced by the creation of the modern National Guard system, which centralized military authority and paved the way toward a permanent professional mercenary force. The idea and practice of the militia as the body of the people fell into neglect, yet constitutionally, the path remains clear. The militia was never meant to be a private army nor a federal standing force, but the organized citizenry of the states. To understand the right to bear arms in the American tradition of self-government, one must first recover the original meaning of the militia and the role of the Minuteman in the defense of a free nation. And in the poll from Monday, if we were to revive the traditional militia concept today, what form should it take? Most of the folks that answered said county-based volunteer militias. And then the next one was state-organized citizen militias and universal citizen militia training. Nobody wanted to keep the current military system, and nobody said the militia should not return. So county-based volunteer militias are different than state-organized citizen militias under the law and for various reasons, but most people seem to want it to be as small, local as possible. County-based volunteer militias would be a little bit more difficult because the smaller that you organize the independent cells that would be involved in that arrangement between the state and the citizen militia and whatever. So if we're talking about the county, it'd be the state, then the county, then the citizen, and the arrangement between them would be quite different than historically what it's been in the past. The closest thing to that might be we'd have to look back quite far to feudal times when knights responded based on their direct leadership, the baron or whoever it might be that they are responsive to. Yeah, that would be it would just be a little bit different than a state-based militia, the way that the American system had developed it, the way the colonies had developed it since the 1600s and before that, actually. Okay, I want to remind you guys before I get going that all these articles throughout the week, they're all available for free. They're all for anybody who wants to go and check them out. But on the Thursdays of every week, I put up a much more detailed article for my paid subs. And so I encourage you guys to go and become a paid sub and support me and get a lot more out of this. Now, what is a militia? The furthest back that we can look into the record and see the structure of somehow, in some way of a militia, we can look to the 700s AD, and we can see the Saxons um, basically exercising a militia, but all Germanic peoples exercised a militia in some capacity. What that means, and it ties directly with the right to bear arms, or the duty to bear arms, which was what it was before it was a right. So if we look back almost throughout the entire European history, we see that there was a duty to bear arms and to be able to bear them and responsive to threats to one's nation or tribe. This was an arrangement between whatever the state was and the citizenry before we had the notions that we have today about in the law about what is a state and what is its citizenry. So at the tribal level, there's the chief or whatever, and the nation, the nationals, the people that make up the body of that nation. And in the arrangement, there was the definitive structure was that if you were within a certain age range, and this changed over time, then you were part of the body of people that were selected to defend the nation. There was different ranks involved in that and different oaths and different ways that you might come to that. But anybody who was, especially males, that's what lasted anyway, but also females were involved in this in different nations. But if you're of a certain age, you had to participate in this body of uh, prepared warriors, prepared defenders of your nation. You didn't have the choice. There is the argument that choice existed for those who were willing to pay sort of a tax against that, but that did not always exist. It did exist in the American colonies, but it did not always exist. So basically, if you were able to bear arms, then and you were within the right age, you had a duty to bear arms to your nation, to your people. You didn't have a choice in the matter. And if you didn't show up when it was time to defend your nation, then you could be put to death or other punishments might occur. So the whole development within the law, within the common law that evolved us to where we are, well, not today, where we were 158 years ago and before, the 90 years in which the uh, constitutional republics existed, when the United States of America properly existed in law, the idea has been forever that you have a duty to respond in defense of your nation because you are one of a body. You are not hyper individualistic. You do not have the right to bear arms as unique from your duty to be part of the militia. Even in the Second Amendment, the people try to separate the phrases. The first and second phrase go hand in hand. They are not separate. You cannot have a militia without an armed population. And you cannot have an armed population that is not the militia. The militia is the body of the people. Here we go. So, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. People attempt to separate this phrase from the collection of words in this phrase. You can't just cut it apart. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not infringe. Because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So we cannot take away the people's arms or their right to bear them, because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, because the militia is the people. These things all go together. There is no right to hunt. There is no right to hobby shoot. It's or sport. These are rights. These are pleasures one might take with the right, but they are not rights in and of themselves. They are tangent to the right. They are included within the right. The right itself carries a duty, as all rights do, actually. The right bears the duty, has the burden of the duty. So as you take on the right as a free man, you also bear the duty as a free man. And so the amendment is not fragmented. It is a joined proposition. The militia is necessary to the security of a free state. The people, therefore, must keep and bear arms. Without the arms, the militia is a lie. Without the people, the militia is a managed corps, or otherwise a centralized army. When you have neither, freedom is dependent on institutions separate from the nation, foreign institutions to the people, foreign being anything that is not of the people and the will of the people. The tradition proves the rule. Since 700 AD, with the Saxon record, the people were duty-bound to bear weapons for the common defense. This was not because they were under a grant from God, which is where rights are derived from, God and nature. They were not given this grant from God to go hunt, shoot arrows at targets as a hobby. They were bound by sworn oath to defend the tribe, the nation. They needed weapons to do that. They needed to be trained regularly and to maintain their proficiency and their weaponry. Fathers were required to train their sons, provide arms and armor to them. Failure to fulfill this obligation could mean taxation increases or even forfeiture of life, or failure to muster and defend the nation in times of need, as I said before. In Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 15 and 16, Congress is authorized to call forth the militia to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining it, while reserving to the states the appointment of officers and the authority to train the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. That still exists today. It's just ignored. And it is a really profound balance between centralization and, just like everything, between centralization and egalitarian individualism, you might say. The balance is weighed really well throughout the Constitution, throughout the Articles of Confederation, because these were built by a people who had attained these balances already in their lives. They had the understanding of it. Rejecting both anarchic privatism and centralized monopoly, the extremes that are commonly run to by masses of fearful populations. People will not be able to carry even an ounce of nuance. They will run based on their fears to these extremes. Hyper-egalitarianism, so everybody's got to be communist, or which comes with a lot of other things, Marxist, or hyper-centralization, which is often can be the tyranny of one, or the tyranny of an oligarchy, or however that is, which is also communism, interestingly. The extremes: egalitarianism for the people and centralization of authority for the elite class. That is communism. So this is the opposite of that. Opposite of communism is the balance between the individual and the community, and the rights that you receive and the duties that you are obligated to. The militia is a distributed institution rooted in the people and mediated through the states, and that is the balance. The people themselves fulfill the role of the militia, of the defense of the nation, but the state mandates how. It becomes the force of order. It constructs the mechanism through which the militia can organize efficiently and defend the nation in times of need. You can't have that either. You can't have militia without a centralized state of some kind, even if that centralized state is just to the extent of the county level, right? Even at that level, the county would still be in charge of ordering the militia to create a uh, a centralized hub around which these people operate, know the mission, know the propaganda, know how to do that, exercise proper regimented training for anybody who's been in the military. Imagine every single one, every single one of you having a different idea about how you're going to organize. It doesn't work. Hyper individualism does not work. So this is the cause of the balance. I hammer away at this quite a lot because I think that it is largely misunderstood, the balances that are created between the nation and the state or within the state, how a nation is formed, what maintains it. These things, highly fundamental things that everybody knew 150 years ago. Everybody knew these things, but we've been generationally afflicted with stupidity more and more and more until the point of today where you can barely have a conversation with somebody without having to break down several walls of ignorance or oftentimes just inattention or uh, false notions about the world that we are pummeled with every single day of our lives. Anyway, so the militia is the people. Its origins is its origin is founded in the European tradition, and it was structurally maintained throughout the European tradition for at least since 700 AD. But when you look at the nature of it, you can extrapolate. You can understand without seeing the evidence of it that the fact is that just because we can only see it going back to 700 AD, perhaps, and I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but we have strong evidence of it in 700 AD with the Saxons, but we could take it much further that the origin point of the duty to bear arms could go back as far as humans have existed. And it would make sense because it is a um, sort of on par with any kind of maxim of law or maxim of culture or maxim um, of of any kind of martial understanding is that you have the people that are able to bear arms, bearing arms, and they are duty bound to respond to any threat, foreign or domestic. This isn't something that's birthed out of uh, ambiguity or somebody just didn't come up with the idea. Like almost all other law that exists, it is born of tradition and the most intelligent people of every generation bending their mind to task upon whether or not a law is properly considered, whether it is something that needs to be changed or adapted to circumstances. And now we have thousands and thousands of years of of record of law that tells us exactly what people did in different circumstances and how it developed over time. We have different kinds of law from common and civil. We have an entire hundreds of generations of people informing us of these things, why they happened. And so the militia is not an ambiguity. It is not something that came from nowhere. It is something that is bound deeply to the heritage of the European tradition and culture and religion and the body of the people, the blood of the people carrying this tradition, making them survive to the next generation. And now we've been without it for 158 years. We've had it since 700 AD at least, but probably as long as human beings have existed, at least in Europe. And 158 years ago was the end of the militia. Now, I say that 158 years ago because I'm referring to the 14th Amendment. If we want to look at it more realistically, it would be 1903 with the Dick Act, the Militia Act of 1903. This was what officially altered our militia to become the National Guard of the several states. And the reserve militia was the remainder of the statutory class, right? And it's statutory, it's civil, like the duties of the militia, the duties of the body populace to the state in the form of militia is civil as well, but you have a right to bear arms because you have a duty to the militia, the duty represented as the obligation to fulfill the needs of the nation through the mechanism of the state, and the rights that you receive from that are those of you have your arms. Nobody can take them from you. That is rights that are granted to citizens, nationals. That is the people that make up the nation. They are the body populace that is the United States of America. That is not an extension that can be granted arbitrarily to any foreigner who steps foot on the land that is within the territory. That is not considered, and it's actually a violation of the law. So you can imagine anybody who uh, isn't uh, able to be a citizen by the law, carrying arms within a nation, them being foreign to that nation, foreign to the body of the people, and most likely of a different will, religion, or nature, being a threat to that nation. And we are allowing this to happen in the United States of America. We've been allowing this to happen for quite a long time now because when the 14th Amendment passed 158 years ago in 1868, the people who were allowed to have arms, because no longer was it a right, the people who are allowed to have arms are all the people who step foot within the territory because they are all 14th Amendment citizens. Now, can their arms be taken away arbitrarily? Yes, because they don't have rights. But are they allowed to go get arms even if they can't be United States of Americans citizens? Yes, they can, because they can be United States citizens, citizens of the 14th Amendment, contracted state, the de facto state, the communist state. In regards to militias versus centralized forces, the argument that was made for altering the state of our martial defense, our national defense, from the militias of the several states to the National Guard of the several states. This was put forward by Charles W. F. Dick and Elihu Root, who was the Secretary of War at the turn of the century. And they argued that it was easier to get federal money. Uniformity was much easier to attain, and military usability was much more efficient. And the argument came in the post-Spanish American War, and the results of this argument were the changing in 1903 to the National Guard system. But the arguments were not based on recognizing that the militia can be enhanced. It was conducted as a attempt, or it was conducted along the path of the agenda to centralize the military force, to create it, to make it foreign to the body of the people, to negate their rights further, to take away their defensibility of those things that had already been robbed from them in the 14th Amendment. The transition from a militia national defense to a centralized army national defense continued with the National Defense Act in 1916, which just created more concretization of what they started in 1903 and what they really started before 1903 as well. They were already implementing things piecemeal. In 1933, several amendments completed the decisive shift of creating the National Guard of the United States as a reserve component of the Army. So now there was no militia, there was an active duty army, and the National Guard made up what once was the militia. The old militia was legally and effectively absorbed into the more centralized military architecture, and it only took 30 years. So it took 30 years to go from a militia force to a 100% centralized body organized under the United States federal government, the de facto communist state that was developed in 1868, which had converted everybody into slaves, into debt slaves, rather than freeing the blacks, which is what was told to everybody in the Reconstruction, but was actually to enslave everybody. And they successfully performed this coup d'etat. And in 1933, not only did they take away the final vestiges of the right to bear arms and the practice of doing so for the purposes of maintaining the militia, which is necessary for the common defense. They also took all the money from the people. The gold and silver was mandated to be given up from the people to the state. And so we can see a very obvious correlation, which is that when you surrender your martial defense, you also surrender your ability to hold that which is yours, your private property, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. But in 1933, there is no Constitution. There is grants, privileges from the United States government, the federal commie government, and the states are subdivisions of that one entity. So now we have a country that is one entity with subdivided territories called the state of Colorado, the state of Washington, the state of Illinois, the state of Pennsylvania. And they do not have states' rights. And the people do not have rights as citizens of and nationals of the United States of America. The militia was dissolved in 30 years. The money was robbed from the people, starting in 1913, sort of. The big start to it was in 1913, but there was plenty of things that happened before that. The money was taken in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, which transitioned our monetary supply from basically direct treasury money, not T-bills, but what was based on the treasury money in silver and gold, based off of our movable property, our tangible property as a nation. It was transferred into Federal Reserve notes, which is an empty note, carries nothing except debt, and it carries a fraudulent debt on top of that. But it carries this debt and people pay it, and that is the reason for which it stands. Without people paying it, it cannot stand. And it only took 20 years for them to set up a system from the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 to taking our gold, 1933, taking the last vestiges of our defense, our common defense away from us, 1933. And then roughly 40 years after that, another 40 years, they detach our monetary supply entirely from the gold standard, 1971. And everything that's happened basically from, let's call it 1903 in the case of the militia, but everything that's happened from 1903, you can see the centralization of our martial defense, of our national defense more and more, and the misuse of it. Constant warfare, constant state of emergency domestically through executive orders. What a great example of this is what Trump is doing right now and sending people to Iran now for a ground invasion of Iran, which is going to go horribly, and everybody knows this, but also the fact that he can even do this when there is no threat to the United States of America, and to violate the congressional rights to determine a proper war and to determine the funding for that. All of these things are so obvious and nobody cares to do anything about it. But there's also the notion that people have that, oh, they're sending our sons to die. Well, those sons are volunteers. I was in the Army and joined in 2008, and I was a volunteer. I had to go to the office myself, sign my own name to the paperwork, and then voluntarily put myself on a bus and go to training. So it's a mercenary army. It's not, we don't have the draft anymore. Although who knows if, because they could do whatever they want in this commie government that we have. But right now we don't have the draft. We haven't had a draft for a long time. We could argue that the draft was unconstitutional, unfounded, and is and everything, and that the draft for prior wars was wrong. But we don't have the draft now. So now we have a mercenary army. All these sons going off to die in Iran and wherever else they might go, they volunteered. Stop volunteering. If you stop volunteering, it doesn't mean that we are defenseless as a nation. It means we give less power to the state that is today to send us to these ridiculous wars that have nothing to do with us. But you're sacrificing your blood by giving it to this thing. And that brings us to, well, what do we do if we don't have people joining the military? Right now, there's tons of different militias. They're private militias. Private militias are attempting by manipulation of the language to say that they have a right to be a militia and that they can form in common defense of their state. Well, they are wrong. They are wrong in the law, and it doesn't matter what personal moralities or it doesn't matter what we want. That is law theory. We could do anything with law theory. We can say what is moral and what is right and all this stuff, and that gets us into philosophy of what ought to be. What we need to discuss, what we need to talk about, what we need to understand is what the law actually prescribes. You cannot be a private militia because and you can't be a private militia whether you were in the United States of America in 1850 or let's say 1790. You can't be a private militia. You are the militia of the people. You are the people. You just carry your arms. You train at the proper training selection site. You have your generals and you have your colonels and you have your officers and your NCOs chosen by the state. And the people endorse the state with their will to be able to take charge in that fashion. You cannot have a private militia because this indicates that you are creating a paramilitary force. In the United States of America, Prior to 1868, that would have been seen as odd to begin with because you're already part of a militia that is for the common defense. It actually is beneficent and doing the right thing to join that militia if you're of the right age and can bear arms and do all the right things because you are in defense of your people. The flip side now, since 1868, is that you're a 14th Amendment citizen by law. And as a 14th Amendment citizen, you don't have a right to bear arms. You don't have any rights. You have privileges granted by the centralized state. And if you go against any of the ordinances, the codes, the statutes, whatever mandates are created, IRS codes, whatever's out there, the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of law that have been created. You go against these and you are accountable because you're a 14th Amendment citizen, accountable to the laws of the state that you have given your allegiance to. So, especially in this case, if you try to form a private militia to date or a state militia under your own banner, under your own terms, not through the state, you are creating a paramilitary force that is opposed to the laws, which are explicitly almost, I think, every state saying you can't have a private militia. All of them. You can't be a private militia. It's a paramilitary body. It's not state endorsed. It's not. It's they see it as a threat because it is, because they know that the militia was killed in 1933. The final nail put into that coffin, 1933, and it was done for a reason, because they don't want the body of the people to be the militia in defense of the nation. So if you try to form a private militia today, you'll be seen as a terrorist or a potential rebellion, and they're going to pay close attention to you. You cannot exercise a right that you don't have. There's no recognition of it. And if you say, no, I have rights, I'm an American, I have rights, I can carry my firearm however I like, well, no, you can't. You are subject to the laws of the state in which you have given your allegiance, which is the 14th Amendment state. And you've done this through voting for presidents, taking benefits from that state, reaping whatever kind of benefits they might offer from food stamps or whatever else they might hand out to people, because they are the communist mommy daddy state. You have given up your proper political status and your relationship to the United States of America as a national of a state in the republics that exist within the Union. You have given it up. And you can't just declare yourself as a national again. You cannot do this. But the militia still exists in law, it's just not exercised. Technically, it could be called up again. In 10 U.S.C. Section 246, the militia of the United States still includes the organized militia, which today would be the National Guard and Naval Militia, and the unorganized militia, meaning the remaining eligible citizens within the defined class. Now, interestingly enough, what that means in that code today is that whether you're Black or Mexican, first generation Mexican American, or whatever else, you can be called up for the unorganized militia, just as they can call you up for the other things. If there was a draft, they could call you up for that. Now they can call women. Now they can call women. I shouldn't even laugh. It's disgusting, but they can call women into the draft now too. Of any race, despite the fact, and these things give away the fraud, because the Union, the United States of America, was never dissolved. It still exists. It's just like a chair that's not occupied anymore. But uh, the militia could be called up, the unorganized militia. They just don't do it. And technically, within the de jure state, if the de jure state were to be brought back into if the chair were to be occupied for the de jure government in one sense, then they could call up the militia under the terms that exist under that de jure law. The National Guard isn't a true militia. It operates under a state federal united framework, but really it operates technically they're going to call it this hybrid thing, but really it's federal mandate. As you can see when the uh, mining towns in West Virginia decided to openly rebel, or at least that's what it was called. They were fighting the Union towns, and they rose up in arms and started basically a rebellion, but against the Union, uh, uh, against the Union towns, the Union men. When they did this, the governor had to ask the president whether or not he could use the National Guard to quell this, what he called rebellion. And the president gave permission, and that's when they sent them in and they crushed the rebellion. Now, governors can call up National Guard for various things, but there is definitely the federal mandate that allows it to happen, not the state right that cannot be converted. That doesn't exist anymore. Not in practice. It exists in a dual state of law because the Union was never dissolved. Our people have ceased to think of defense and freedom as its own collective burden. Arms have become symbolic instead of structural duty to the nation. Citizenship means nothing when the nation is miscegenated and culturally indistinct. Politics has become complaint without complaint without capacity or even authentic care. The American state nationals of pre-1868 understood that liberty requires more than rights talk, more than ego propping and self-aggrandizement by being based. It requires a people in possession of the means, habits, and institutions by which rights may be secured, and the people themselves in possession of the grit, the spine, and the balls to do whatever is necessary to ensure the survival of those things. This language doesn't really fit the age that we're in to start with, just as I personally don't fit the age that we are in, it seems. Although maybe we'll make a comeback soon. The requirement of the people to be in possession of the means, habits, and institutions by which rights may be secured, and the people themselves in possession of the grit, the spine, and the balls to do whatever is necessary to ensure the survival of those things. When I went to boot camp, I thought it was a breeze. I thought it was easy. I had, I was a wrestler, and I had, very fit, and joined the army. Went to boot camp. All these people around me seemed to be struggling with the physical load that was placed on us, and I just breezed through it. It was nothing. And I just remember thinking how soft the whole process was. And when I talked to the old timers that went to boot camp 50 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it might have been, the difference is immense. The character of that, the people that need the most uh, preparation and training for dealing with hardship, they treat it so softly today. They coddle you. This is the nature. This isn't a microcosm. This is the nature of the nation. Coddled by the mommy daddy state, soft. Soft in the mind, soft in the body. In 1776, they were not soft in the mind and they were not soft in the body. These were people that were extraordinarily active and fit. Most of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence were in their youth, 20s, 30s. Fit, well studied in the classics, especially in the classics. But well studied in general. And their minds were sharp. And these were people that knew how to converse and debate without resorting to factionalism that would destroy internally the mechanism of their common aim, which doesn't exist today. Today, factions fight each other even though they're aiming for the same thing. I just did something about this recently, which was that there's this argument happening, it seems, between nationalists. That is, who should we hate more? And it's a stupid premise to begin with. But should we be hating the Muslims, or should we be hating the Jews, or maybe it's the Indians, or maybe it's whoever? It's a stupid premise to be divided upon. If you notice that there's a problem, yes, there might be a schema or an order to which you might have to face the problem. But the problem doesn't go away because you choose one thing or another over. It just does it. The premise is stupid. Right now, there is most definitely a problem in all Western nations, European nations, and well, just white nations, which is the immigration problem of all different types of people coming into those nations. And to say that we need to hate one or the other is just ridiculous. It's stupid. It does not give credit to the people who are speaking these words. It makes you look dumb. Stop fighting over these stupid, divisive things. Organize yourself. Get going on something real or shut the fuck up. It's really what it comes down to. The divide and conquer is so strong every single moment if you're not vigilant and paying attention to how it's coming about. Why am I arguing with this person over this thing? At every given moment, at every opportunity, challenge yourself with that question. Why am I not working together with this person? If you're not doing that, you're not just not a solution, you're a problem. But I want to bring it back to the weakness. Our founding fathers in the United States were not weak. They were strong as fuck. They had strong minds, strong bodies. And then you looked to the what I've been comparing a lot lately because I'm trying to convince people. I'm not trying to conflate. I'm trying to convince people, to persuade you to investigate into this because it makes sense to me. That the NSDAP in the 20s, 30s, and 40s looked very similar to the American colonial situation from 1775 to, let's call it, well, it lasted for 90 years in the case of America. So, versus, uh, well, it's arguable how long it lasted with the NSDAP because there was movements before that, it's not just when they took power. There was things happening before, and then there was a time frame in which they were correcting for the problem, and then there was the war, and so it's not exactly clear, but let's just call it a little over a decade in which the NSDAP gave us record of how they operated and what they did and what they accomplished and what they failed at. And when we look at both of these things, we see so many similarities between them that it's ridiculous. Maybe I'll do a whole article on this or a whole week on this at some point, where I show the comparisons of what the laws looked like, what the cultures looked like, how the people, their motives, the outcomes of what they did, and how they shared in so many different things. The the weakness inside of us is not 100% our fault. We have to recognize this, that we are weak today, not because we're just weak people. This has been generation after generation after generation after generation of destabilizing us, deracinating us, making us disconnected from our heritage, even one generation ago, as they did with 1933, that 30 years, right? Basically a generation to two generations, they totally collapsed the notion of the militia, the body populace, knowing that they are the ones that must defend the nation. This cultural standard was eliminated in 30 years. It doesn't take very long, and we've been at this for generation after generation after generation, this being attacked, being assaulted by these parasitical class. And so why are we weak? Why is it that there's a 40% obesity rate? Why is it that our children are uh, less intelligent than at any other time in recorded history in this country? Well, we've been worked on. At the same time as you must recognize this and say, okay, we've been fucked. Our population, our people, our race, our nation has been raped, stolen from, every crime. There's only 5 crimes in existence: murder, assault, rape, theft, and trespass. And all of these things have happened to our people collectively over all these years. And so we recognize that history. We say, okay, we've been weakened by this class of people, by this entity, but now I'm alive today. Now I have the duty to bear the torch. What am I going to do with it? Well, if you're alive and you're hearing these words, then it's your duty. We don't have the option to just have the militia be the 17 to 40 crowd anymore, or whatever it was. I don't remember, actually. But we have to have everybody all working on the same goal, because our enemy is more entrenched than ever before in history, stronger than ever before, has more authority than at any other time in history. And we are weaker than any other time in history. And so we need everybody to on board into something that corrects course, of whatever age and capacity. But the militia that I'm talking about in this sense is not those who need be like the Minutemen, who are those who are prepared in a minute to go into battle. In 1 minute's notice, they ride to battle. Not everybody has to be there, but we have to have everybody absorbed into this ideological base and understanding. Otherwise, it doesn't go forward. It does not require that you actually convert or whatever. You don't have to convince every living soul. You have to convince the right people that the cause is worthy, that of the intellectual premise of it, of the necessary timeline, of all those things that are required to accomplish any kind of organized goal. And we have to recognize the similarities between us and dispose of those differences that separate us and divide us, even when they're seemingly vast divides. Where you can work, you work there. The militia of today has to be, firstly, ideologically aligned. It has to be composed of many different ages and classes of people, and it has to work as one body. We have to remember how to be strong again, to have the grit and the spine and the balls. Yeah, in boot camp, they would tell us we don't have a spine because we couldn't withstand one thing or another. We couldn't run one more mile. We couldn't ruck it up that next big hill. And so they would say we have weak spines. And it's true. It's absolutely true. As a people, we have weak spines. And and the bones, actually, this is interesting. Less people are getting through boot camp today because they're getting shin splits. It's indicative of the fact that, one, the training is soft. Uh, the training is soft, so soft compared to what it used to be. And what you might imagine of war fighting, training for war fighting, it's very soft. And yet these people are getting more injuries related to bone strength. We are weakening. We need to turn it around. But when we send our kids into school to sit for 8 hours a day, absorbing bullshit, uh, doesn't really work. And also, I apologize. I go on so many tangents, but to bring it back around, also the weakness versus the strength in Germany, in Weimar Germany, they were very weak. We're a weak people. They were consumed with um, the the commie wet dream, ultimate depravity. But in Germany, it was really not nationwide, or you could say nations wide, because they also had states. In Germany, it wasn't like that. It was really mostly centered around the major cities and predominantly Berlin, where the depravities really took root. The rest of the country didn't feel it so much. They've done far better job of contorting our people. And it's everywhere. It's across the country. It's in the cities, it's rural, everywhere you go. In the states that you would imagine that they wouldn't be able to take root, that we have mentally built up this structure around that. No, that could never happen there, like the fact that there's 3 new mosques, I think, or 2 new mosques going up in Texas every month. Uh, and it's a major influx of Muslim people to that state, and people might go, "Oh my God, that's wild! I would have never imagined that being in Texas," but it's everywhere, of all different ways, shapes, and forms of destroying our people. Trannies not being able to, or trannies being allowed into schools to teach kids about dildos. Uh, and the books being provided in these libraries are the same kind. The the encouragement in every way, shape, and form of stepping out of the nuclear family and taking care of family and not shoving your kids out the door at 18 and and maintaining a solid structure that is able to withstand whatever comes in life. No, everybody's got to be hyper individual, right? The fact that enormous sum of marriages don't last longer than 7 or 8 years, and that over 70% of them are initiated by the women, who now have the state as the middleman in their marriage and between their children and the fathers and the children especially. And so in every way, the breakup of the family. These structures didn't exist in Germany, but they exist here, and they exist everywhere, very deeply. But the NSDAP came along and they reminded everybody. They said, hey, you can be strong again. You don't have to be ashamed. And in fact, your shame is built on fallacy. We need to do the same thing here. We need to be as strong and stronger than those who conquered the depraved Weimar Germany, and as strong and stronger as those who created the first ever instance of sovereignty being given to the body of the people in any nation on the planet. As a legal structure. Of course, I think that this same structure was built on the ancient structures, the ancient Germanic structures in which the people actually were free. They just didn't classify it in all these ways. They had a sovereign who was the king or whatever, tribal leader, but all the people that were born of that tribe were free. So it was actually a remake of that design with modern notions implanted into it, with Christian notions implanted into it. But really, it's far more ancient than all that. Freedom was the principle of the Germanic peoples in the body of the people. We have to remember our strength. We have to stop feeling any amount of stupid shame from false narratives that have been placed upon us. We have to remember the fact that we are so superior to all of that garbage. And I think that's happening. There's an awakening and maybe it's not in the way that I like or the theme that I like. There is a lot of I share a lot of memes and all this, but I'm not huge on meme culture and this fast-paced thing. It's destructive actually, but we need more people reading books and having long discourse and debate and conversation that challenges and awakens the mind in a proper setting. But yes, the memes and the really fast news and the divulgence of content in every form and fashion in this way has its place, especially for younger people. But that's the tip of the iceberg. Once we get people actually reading and then organizing and taking action upon what they are confirmed to know, not just regurgitating from meme warfare, then we see something actually happening. When we see thousands of organizations developing, that's when we see something happening. And I mean thousands of organizations succeeding in their localities. It'll come. And I've said this in the past. The time will come because it always does. These things are cyclical. And understanding when the right time is just a matter of studying history and then realizing how the pressure works. But also, the people that we're opposed to are experts at managing that pressure. As I've said a lot of times in the past, they are they have structured the entire system of AI and algorithmic monitoring of people and surveillance. And there are thousands of institutions around the world that are all specifically built to determine ways to control masses of people. And they say it on their face. Like the Stanford Institute of International Affairs, the Club of Rome, um, the Aspen Institute, even Bilderberg, and all the ones that people know, Council of 300, all these different institutions. There's way more than people know. Actually, I did an article with all these institutions on them, and I think it must have had at least like 1,000 different on there. And it says the article was, "Let's build a terrorist list or something like that, and let's put the real terrorists on it." And it goes back into old families and just 1,000 institutions that exist, or they exist today, and they are all actively working to suppress the people under a one world Jewish government. Call it whatever else you want. So we're going up against an enemy that knows how to relieve the pressure, close the lid, apply the pressure like a pressure cooker, and we have to take advantage of the pressure in the right moments. Otherwise, they will open the relief valve through different mechanisms, and they will basically make it impossible, because it's a metaphysical thing. People have to have the energy within them to be able to overcome obstacles that are mental obstacles and physical obstacles in their lives, to be able to achieve the next level of understanding or experience. So if they don't have the energy because they're depressed, and when I say depressed, I mean their energy is literally being depressed within them, then they won't have the energy to do whatever it takes to move forward. And mental energy, the brain consumes 1/3 of the body's energy. So the energy, there's a physical limit to it, of how much you can do when your energy is depressed, and almost everybody's energy is depressed. So we have to have the energy, and that pressure builds up, and it's almost like anger, being able to shape the world around you with your anger, with the rage that we feel when we become aware of what's happening in the world around us, and being able to use that in the proper manner to achieve our goals. There are institutions out there that have mastery over this. We have to become an integrity based effort, and you leverage this pressure, this energy, to achieve our goals. So on Friday, yesterday, if you were to discover, this is on every Friday, there's a challenge question based on the conclusion that I make for the topic that week. If you were to discover that you have no real rights, that you, your family, and your nation have been generationally enslaved by an internationalist communist cabal, what would you do? Would you sit on your ass and do nothing? Would you feel the rage course through your veins and then allow it to dissipate into nothing? Or would you feel that rage, which is natural, the anger toward that which is destroying you, the enemy of you, your people, your family? Would you feel that rage and then adapt yourself through that rage to be able to approach a solution, to work a solution upon the world around you, to correct for the problem, become responsible and free once more, to be a free man and a free woman in the world again, taking control of your life and then dictating the terms to the world around you, rather than succumbing to the terms other people make. That is the baseline for what it means to become free, to be free, to maintain your freedom. You have to be able to maintain it yourself. The terms of being a free man who's able to be part of the militia, because if you're not a free man, you can't be part of the militia. The militia is the body of free men. So if you are not able to be part of the militia because you're not a free man, then you're just a guest of the nation. You don't have to participate in the defense of it. But if you are a free man, then you are responsible for everything in your life. You're not getting benefits from some foreign government or whatever entity. Otherwise, you're not reaping something because you contract to get free things from people. It's contrary to the notion of an honorable man and the way that they might live their life. To be an honorable man is to be noble. Nobility is born in the blood just as much as it can be born by those who take drastic actions in their life to enhance their character and to become noble. Nobility can be seen in carriage, in action, in the language, in the way that somebody lives their life in general. Nobility can be seen. I did an article on, basically the whole article was really on nobility. That was the backdrop for it. And I just discussed this recently, so maybe I won't do it again. Yeah, I'm not going to get into it again. But there is such a thing as inherent nobility. You are born with it. It's Will Smith said this thing some years ago that you're born with talent, and what you work on, you gain skill on. So you beat away at your craft, and you gain skill at that thing. So if you're born with a talent, you're naturally adept at doing a thing, and then you work on it, you're going to become very great at that thing. Some people are just born with that sort of talent, that nobility, but everybody has the opportunity and the chance to, and the choice to adapt themselves to that quality, that nobility. And living in that way makes it possible to achieve great ends. A lot of times I find myself in stupid online arguments with people that otherwise I would think of them as allies, but they don't have the ability to communicate in a decent manner. They don't have the ability to actually frame rhetoric around uh, an honorable discourse. Instead, it is there's the three layers of intelligent discourse. The first layer is what the majority of the people stay tugging on, which is to discuss people and the character of one another. And when they're having a discourse, they debate the character of the other rather than the topic in question. That is the first level. And to me, it always shows me the nature of the person. It describes for me the intelligence level and the capabilities of the person I'm discussing with. Now, there are times when discussing the character of another human being is important. You're determining the quality of that person in your life, perhaps, or to do a certain task. But that's pretty much where that ends. The second is events. That is, something happened, let's discuss that thing. Why did it happen? What happened before it? What happened after? What it describes on its path through time and how we relate to it. Okay, I get it. Events happen. We have to discuss them. The U.S. is sending troops to Iran for a ground war. Great. That event is now known. We don't have to hammer away at it for the next month. We understand it. Now, what do we do about it should be the next question, but that usually doesn't happen. So people stuck on events, they just discuss event after event after event after event. They never get anywhere with it. They just continue to discuss events. This is the second layer and describes a little bit more intelligence, but not much more. It's still this narrow focus on something that is fleeting, sort of meaningless. Events matter when they matter, not in perpetuity. The pattern that describes the events matter in perpetuity. Okay, the third thing is to discuss the actual quality of what we are uh, uh, wrapping our minds around, the topic. To discuss the quality of that is to reach a whole nother level. It basically describes the philosopher, but the philosopher cannot describe the event very well. So you have to be able to move through the various levels, but the ability to stay in a conversation and keep the topic as the focal point and not the mouth that the words are coming out of, but the topic at hand, and to keep it focused on that topic and do something with that to create some sort of benefit out of that. This all seems very fundamental, I'm sure, but it is something that is a major flaw that exists, and I see it 9 times out of 10 at least in the discourse that I see online and the discourse that I have in person, is that people 9 times out of 10 actually is probably just people focused on the other people. They can't actually discuss the topic. And events are only used to revert back to the quality of the person. So maybe it's more like 90 out of 100 times they're talking about people. And then maybe 5 times the next out of the 10% left, 5% they're talking about events, and 5% is the people who can stay within that topic. They can maintain a conversation at this highest level, and they can review this without invading the topic with their ego. And both parties can see the personalities of the other, recognize it, and not be dissuaded from a conversation because of it. And what I mean by that is, I can have conversations with almost anybody. It doesn't matter to me. You can be uh, of any quality or class of human being, and I can have a discussion with you. That doesn't mean that I'm going to. It means that I can with any class of people, and I have. So I am absolutely 100% diametrically opposed to transgenderism, but I have had many conversations with transgender human beings, and never did I feel at any time that I needed to stop the conversation based on the personality of the other, except for when I get bored of hearing the same thing over and over again, when it leaves the topic, basically. I don't care about the person involved in the conversation. It matters far less. And if they can maintain a conversation in the topic, then I can stay and talk forever on this. We can discourse to the end of our days on whatever, but I'm probably not going to do that either. Yeah, I froze up. Am I back on now? I don't know unless you tell me. So anyway, there's There's those that can stay on the topic and okay, great, I'm back on. And if they can remain on the topic, then you're probably communicating with someone who would do very well at communicating themes to other people, who would probably do well in some sort of leadership capacity of human beings. The human being that can only talk about personalities. This might be, you can imagine the quality of the person that speaking of, who watches reality television and learns and starts to regurgitate this mentality that all that exists in life is other people and what they're doing. And this is the nature of social media. And uh, oh, this person's got, taking pictures of their food, and this person's they're bungee jumping today, and and just the incessant overflow of what other people are doing and their shallow lives rather than the events. And now people are really coming into more of a discussion of events because things are getting serious. When things get more serious, people start paying attention a little bit more. The window shifts, right? And so people are talking about events very heavily, but they're also mostly still talking about like the people involved in those events, Donald Trump, rather than the event itself, and then also not the nature of these things, the undertone, the quality, the topic. And when I say topic, I'm just probably could use another word better here, but the nature of the thing that's happening, the roots, being able to discuss why something is happening in the world around us or why something is happening, the motivation for an action. The action is the event. The person is the one who did it. The motivation for the action, that's what I mean by the topic. That's what I mean by the highest level of reasoning and logic and adeptness at using cognition and developing understandings of the world develop from this. Why did what happened happen? And this is where we develop patterns that describe the world, and we understand historically what's been going on. Uh, and where we're going to. Yes.
I can't check.
Huh?
I can check.
Yeah. So I've been talking for a while now, and I usually end it to an hour and a half, but this topic is very important. I really wish that more people would be interested in coming and debating me. I get bored of one-sided conversation, and I have dozens and dozens of challenges out there for debates, and an equal amount or more of invitations for conversations to happen in these topics. Very rarely do people answer the debates, which is what I'm probably most interested in, because it is in the challenges where we grow. If we agree, the conversation can be dull and boring for me as much as well as for people listening on. But we can develop greater solutions through collaboration. So also, I'm interested in that. But there's a million people out there with opinions on everything. And the debates allow us to navigate the realm of convincing folks that share those same mentalities as the debater in how to navigate getting them to understand the other side. And that could be me learning to understand what the other is debating, or them understanding what we're debating. And it creates actually opportunities for greater collaboration and greater kind of breaking down the barriers of separation and questioning what's really out there. Debate is a really fantastic thing, which is why it's existed in all the ancient Grecian culture to everything else. I mean, people would go in Germanic culture. People would go to the thing, and they would debate as a community over various topics of what they needed to do as a people, as a tribe, or whatever. And all the debates that I see out there are really kind of low quality. People don't ask the right questions, and if they do, they get kind of stupid answers that you would expect. And I definitely do better in a question answer or just a back and forth kind of situation. Lecturing is fine, but it can also be limiting. So to bring it back around is that the militia is the proper defense of a nation that is constructed the way that ours is. And as such, we need to return to the militia. How we get there? Well, if you're going to be around in half an hour, I'm going to have another live where I discuss what we are teaching with de jure nationality status correction, political status correction, how that is the only remedy at law that allows us to access the constitutional republics of the sovereign states. It is the origin of what people today call state nationalism, which is mostly frauds, uh, telling people how to do things that will get them into prison rather than an understanding of the actual law that supports state nationalism, political status correction, the international law, the domestic law, the difference between de jure and de facto law, and where we stand within it. And it's all quite a lot simpler than people make it out to be. And it does not involve having to know every single thing in the law. It involves having to know how to operate as a free man fundamentally, and then, functionally how the law works to get us there, to return us to that place. Once we are there, then we have access to the militia.
What? What?
Um, I'll tell you what, courageous lion. You got a lot of questions here. Some of these questions were answered in prior lives, but I can answer these really quickly, perhaps. And then I'll end this chat because I have to stop for a minute, do some other things, and then prep for 2:30 when we will be talking about the law. What do I want to debate? I want to debate anything with anyone that has any real meaning for the world today. So if there's anything that I say or write about and somebody has an opposing view, then I would love to have them on. And if they have the ability to actually have a debate, if they have the intellectual capacity and the proper personality for being able to do a debate, then I would love to have them on. I don't really care how well known a person is or anything like that. It doesn't matter to me. If you have something to say that's really well put together, I'd love to have people on. Who do I believe modern Israel is versus the Israel of the Bible? Well, I answered this in my article called Judaism, but very quickly. Modern Israel is the state that is declared by the Zionists in the later half of the 19th century. It is not the Jewish homeland. It is the homeland of those who are uh, the globalists, the monopolists, the Zionists. They're all one thing. The communists, they're all the same entity, and they are not just the people that were known as Epiro in Egypt 4,500 years ago, but they are a selection of people from all across different areas, predominantly Middle Eastern area, Persian area, that have spread across the globe. Um, but there's a lot of other people that have now become part of that structure. Um, am I a Christian? No, I am not a Christian. I think I answered that last week pretty well in universalist religions versus tribal religions. I don't. I don't see universalism as a good thing, that's for sure. But I also can work with Christians so long as our goals align. And I think right now, especially, those goals are becoming more aligned because more people are realizing the nature of white resistance collectively to our extinction, which is the greatest mission that people can have today who are of these places. Everything else has to be secondary to it by the nature of it, or we go extinct. Christian Zionism is retarded. And I mean that in the definition of retard, what that means. These people are inhibited unto themselves. Judeo Christianity and Christian Zionism is all just stupid. Militia proves to be the best form of defense. The militia beat the U.S. Army in Vietnam and Afghanistan. Well, kind of, sort of. Uh, you know, Vietnam was heavily supported by other nations. The North Vietnamese were not just a militia; they were heavily supported. But I see the point. Yes, militias can be very effective. Afghanistan also wasn't exactly what you'd call a militia. It was a little bit different, but yes, generally, I see what you're saying. If properly put together, a militia can defeat a centralized army. I mean, you look at the way that the American colonists defeated Britain or England, and uh, of course, the uh, militia has two components. Okay, there's the Minutemen in the way that the colonists frame this. There's the Minutemen, and then there's the militia. The militia is the totality of the body of people that are capable of bearing arms, and they are duty bound to be called up and form the main body of that entity of defense. And then there is the Minuteman, who is the one who is voluntarily involved in a greater degree of training and activity and preparation, and is almost like a standing army to the extent that they train more often, but they're still local. They're still uh, they're like reservists, but they're ready to go at all times. And then there's the standing army, and even during the American Revolution, there was a standing army, but it was a standing army to the extent that a war was on. And so the standing army is just in constant training and in constant uh, uh, involvement in the architecture of a military force, whereas the Minutemen come and go based on the battles that are near to them. They don't necessarily cross state lines, or they don't necessarily involve themselves in battle after battle after battle. Also, they come and go. Their times are shorter in which they are mandated to participate. There is a lot of differences in there. The militias did actually travel over states, but that's not always the case everywhere. They ignore everything you just mentioned. No, they don't ignore everything about the 14th Amendment that I discussed, because they have not been confronted with it in the way that you will see. If you're here in 30 minutes, you will see what we are teaching. They have not been confronted with it. Many thousands and thousands of people have been doing something regarding state nationalism, and they've been doing it wrong. They have been scammed by great scammers, lost lots of money, ended up in prison, or nothing has happened because they haven't done anything worthy of the attention. So we will teach the correct way. Um, we agree on everything. um, yeah, there's a lot of scammers teaching the wrong things about state nationalism and the law. It's a big problem because a lot of them are agents intentionally doing it, and then there's the others that are just trying to make money off of it, and it's too bad. But we are here to correct the narrative. For those who don't know, correcting the narrative is uh, a fundamental component of why Liberty Uncensored exists. It is to correct the falsities. And in my last book, it goes by the same premise: unveiling a better world, deconstructing the veracity of the American fable. That is to take apart that which is false, to break down what is false, so that we might build up what is correct and right. I'm going to end it here because I do have to go and do some things before I get on the next call. But anybody who wants to stick around, I will be back at 2:30 to start another call. And I think LB Bork will be on, who's the uh, state national guru and has been doing this for a very long time. And so I'll be back then. Thank you guys for coming on and taking time out of your day to enjoy this content. Remember to stay strong. Don't be weak faggots. Sometimes you just got to say it, right? Sometimes you just got to say it the way that it is. Don't have a weak spine. Get up, exercise or move your body, do whatever you got to do physically to get right, and exercise your mind. Study, read books. Don't just do online content. If you're going to have this playing, I'd rather you stick it in your ear while you're at the gym, listen to the audio, than to sit and watch this. Make your life something hard. Don't get lost in the comfort. Put yourself in situations that create discomfort so that you might know how to be strong in the first place. Everything's too comfortable. Create discomfort in your life. Make some stress that's positive stress that makes you grow, not the stress that's causing you heart attack, which is from sitting on your ass. Okay, thank you guys for coming on, and stay tuned for the next videos that will come out every Saturday at least, and hopefully more than that, discussing these various things, solutions to the problems that exist today, how to actually correct for the problems that we have today. Yep. Thank you guys for coming on.